If you are joining us for today's PLMA Load Management Dialogue, welcome. Glad to have you with us. If you are not familiar with PLMA, we are a collaborative community for energy load management practitioners. And of course, we are dedicated to advancing load flexibility across the grid for grid reliability, resilience, and technical innovation. If you are a member of PLMA, we welcome you back. And if you don't know too much about PLMA and our membership, please take a look at our website. There's lots of information there, and you can see also all of the folks that are already part of this community. And last of all, I wanted to let you know that PLMA also has a web page on our website that specifically lists all of current webinars as well as upcoming webinars. And you can take a look at that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what's ahead. And so let us now get ready to jump into today's conversation. So in advance of PLMA's Summer Symposium, which includes 2 tracks this year, the first will be on EV grid impacts, and the second track at the Summer Symposium will be around load flexibility in data centers. Today, we are delighted to be providing a little bit of a preview of some of the valuable content that you'll be seeing around EVs. Our host for today's PLMA Electric Transportation Interest Group co-chair, Stacy Noblet of ICF, will be moderating today and taking your questions, as well as talking with our speakers. And if you do have questions for the speakers as they're presenting, please put them in the chat and Stacy will ask them at the end of their presentations. And now it is my pleasure to invite our presenters to get started. And Stacy, why don't you jump right in here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judy. And we really appreciate everyone joining us today live and listening in later on. As Judy mentioned, my name is Stacy Noblet. I am a vice president with ICF. We are proud members of PLMA and have been for quite some time. We are going to start off with introductions, but wanted to give you a sneak preview of what you'll hear today. On the next slide, I will acknowledge the driving force behind today's webinar, which is PLMA's Electric Transportation Interest Group. I have the pleasure of serving as co-chair, along with Katie Parkinson, Kessie Avsakova, and Megan Jennings. We are always interested in hearing from you about what you'd like to hear from PLMA on the intersection of electric vehicles and load management, so please be sure to reach out to any of us at any time. And now for today's lineup, representing really the range of stakeholders involved in today's featured topic. We'll go to the next slide and bring in Nick Fiore from San Diego Gas and Electric, Alex Pulowski from Kia, and Matthew Mills from the Mobility House. And I'll hand the mic over to Matthew to get right to it. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining. Super excited to be able to talk about this today, and I'm going to try to go pretty quick so we can save some time for Q&A. But this is a presentation Nick and I developed for Spring PLMA that we presented in Indianapolis, and so excited to kind of repeat it and provide some fresh content updates. But generally, so I'm Matthew Mills. I work at Mobility House, but previously I worked at Portland General Electric and have been trying to do a project like this for years and years, the whole time alongside Nick. So I was excited to see how we're able to get a bi-directional charger installed at a real customer home and use this as a way to, kind of make waves. We wanted to go through the real process, not getting exceptions, just to force one single site through. But we wanted to work with the utility and the customer and all the various stakeholders of what is the current status of getting hardware installed, getting approval, getting interconnection, and then making sure that the technology works and functions for the end customer. So we at the Mobility House, we have a big project in Massachusetts where we're installing currently we have 40 residential installs happening in the next month or so. So before we started getting deploying for that scale, we wanted to start with one unit. So we worked with Kia and Wallbox, shopping around at real customer homes, targeting places where we had employees nearby just to do some on-site support. And so then we ended up in San Diego. So contacted Nick, And we came up with this plan of, hey, we just want to get one system installed. What does the existing process look like? And then using this as a way to what needs updating, what were the pain points, and where's the learnings for the industry, for all stakeholders involved, so that we can kind of iterate on this and clear a path for future installations and operation of bidirectional charging at customer sites to function and be easier. So that's what we did. That's what this presentation's on. It's a single site and kind of all our learnings getting this identified through interconnection approval and installation. But yeah, with that, I'll hand it over to Nick for the next couple slides.
Cool. Thanks, Matthew. Hey, everybody. Nick Fiore, San Diego Gas and Electric. I lead our innovation work here in our clean transportation department. So really excited to give an further overview, piggybacking on what Matthew said. How did the utility play a role here? And kind of higher level, right? Before I dive into that, what were we hoping to learn from this process, right? At SDG&E, given we've done several pilots on commercial sites, right? We've installed and operated commercial chargers, worked with partners out in the field to do that. We've had school bus pilots and installations in the past, kind of in the very early days of V2G, but we didn't have any sort of field demonstrations of residential V2G. And really, when we step back and strategically think about all of this from a utility perspective, it's like, what are the friction points, pain points that a customer might encounter? Let's take this from the customer lens here and sort of run an actual customer with actual vendors and stakeholders through that process, and kind of play undercover boss along the way, right? And not shepherding or sort of nudging along in our own expedited kind of way, like we might with a pilot where we have a heavier hand. And we, obviously working at the utility, we know kind of the different levers and stakeholders to kind of nudge to speed things up if it's a very intensive pilot. In this case, we kind of stepped back and more had an observation posture. So, this was our first residential bidirectional grid parallel interconnection that was approved under Rule 21, which is in California, the interconnection process that you have to go through to operate in parallel with the grid. So this has the potential to export right back to the grid. So everything from vehicle to home in this case, all the way through to enrolling in a let's say a demand response program and exporting through that. And that would be ELRP, the Emergency Load Reduction Program here in California, for example, as a future opportunity here for export compensation. But we wanted to test that, right? There have been customers, right, who have installed bidirectional chargers at their homes just purely for backup process. And that doesn't require Rule 21 applications. And so we wanted to see, what does this look like in advance of, for those close to this space and this VGI portion of the EV industry. This is a growing area. This is an area where a lot of automakers and EVSE manufacturers are putting resources, and the value proposition we think is there for a lot of customers. And so we want to get out in front of the anticipating future interconnection applications and make sure our processes are refined. And again, we're not a friction point. So we really key takeaways here from the process, right? Application was submitted 2025, permission to operate granted and February 2026. For those who've gone through this before, maybe in your own utility service territories or with utility partners, actually a relatively quick process. So I think that's sort of the good news. I mean, things can always be faster, but keeping in mind, right, that the safety element is paramount from the utility perspective. So making sure things are ready for safe operations once approved. But some of the takeaways that we found was just having a dedicated champion. So whether that's the installer, a VGI services provider like the mobility house is sort of a third party, but someone who's a point person shepherding all of this along sort of on behalf of the customer. That's critical. The Rule 21 costs, that it's $800 in California, with Rule 21. So that has an impact on the timeline, right? That from a customer perspective, if you're doing sort of the math there on the return on investment, so maybe stretches it out a little further, right, than some other states. So communicating that to customers, I think making sure that's clear from all parties is important. The interconnection process itself, it does function today, but we clearly did it, but we need more specific V2G, V2X instructions that support scalability and support some of the unique customer use cases that might differentiate how you actually apply. And once you get in the weeds, these things can look a little bit different in terms of how you or a contractor or installer might fill out an application. And I mentioned the undercover boss approach already. So those were just some learnings, and definitely I think that was a success. The undercover boss piece. I think we learned some things that we otherwise wouldn't have by just sort of letting the process play out in some ways. So next slide. So just a little more granular here on the timeline, right? And just from project genesis all the way through to the final approvals. You can kind of see the process here from the hardware procurement, vendor or customer reaches out to the utility, the sort of any kickoff meetings that need to happen, customer onboarding, interconnection, permitting, and then really the main roadblock or delay that we'll get into in a second that happened was around municipal permitting. And the release for really a battery. In this case, it's a battery on 4 wheels, right? But in terms of what we need to see to approve this under Rule 21. So we'll get into that in a moment. And then some panel work that was done as well, which is another consideration for folks looking at, supporting customers in this space or developing programs. So I'll hand it back to Matthew, though, for the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. To your point of kind of the having dedicated champions, this is what this slide is getting to, of like showing all the different stakeholders that were in this process and kind of what their role was in this, pushing a single site through, as opposed to kind of a scaled approach and program. So, for us, the mobility house, we acted as kind of like customer representative plus motivator and funder of this project. And then SDG&E, like Nick has undersold how much he helped. So it's just like, making sure that all the internal teams at SDG&E were engaged, understood the value proposition and like the implications of more of these are going to be coming, more of these residential installs are going to be coming. So it's worth our time now to set up a process that's replicable. The customer, I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next slide. Honestly, lucked out with having such a great customer. They're very collaborative and helpful. And then the kind of technical side. So Coil was the electrician coordination company that's in partnership with Wallbox. They ended up doing the installation themselves. They had tons of learnings. Again, very collaborative. And then, Kia, Wallbox, couldn't give enough flowers to both of them for being engaged, answering both everybody's questions, including the customers. And we've got Alex on the call today from Kia. So if you have any questions specifically for them in this project or elsewhere, feel free to voice those. And then, as Nick was alluding to, I guess like setting up this whole project, we had the top 5 firms very much engaged. We're all in the same process. And a bit of a lessons learned was we didn't engage the municipality, the city of Carlsbad, in their permitting process very early. And so while everything went very smoothly, this kind of blindsided them, and we had a lot of catch up to do to make them understand what we're proposing, how the technology is operating, and then you have to go through their web portal, and it had, I think, either like photovoltaic was the option, and then photovoltaic or battery, and then another option for EVSE. And so like, as you can see, bidirectional chargers fit somewhere between the two of them. And they kept flipping the designation back to EVSE, whereas Nick and I kept having to kind of step back in and say, no, no, this is much more like a battery in terms of the review and approval process. And that was also linked to some of the work orders on the SDG&E side. So that was, if we were to do it again, get well ahead of the municipal permitting process. So yeah, everybody did great. Project was successful, as Nick said. It went extremely fast in terms of utility projects. Up to the next slide, please. Trying to go quick here, but yeah, so just wanted to give some insight into the customer, as I said, and just from our side, like broader learnings about installations, some of the pain points and some things that we'd caution folks on the call to pay attention to if they're doing single site or some scaled program or pilot. But starting with the customer, we intentionally tried to make this easier on ourselves and SDG&E, and so we went for single family home with no existing solar, which is hard to find in Southern California, but we figured we'll get to the whole net metering complication, but let's start with the easiest customer site first. We found a customer through just a bunch of different outreach channels that was very willing to collaborate. They already owned a Kia EV9 and they didn't have an existing charger, which, as you'll see, is good and bad. It's nice they had, we didn't have to pull a charger off and they had adequate wall space. But one of the big findings that you can see on the right is they had a 100 amp service panel, which for both this project and just general, they wanted an upgrade to 200 amps. So they were, they wanted to participate, but they didn't want to commit to installing hardware if there was the potential for them to upgrade their service. So that was, if you look back in that timeline slide, there's a lot of iteration on working with SDG&E and figuring out what the service capacity available to the site was. Ultimately, it was going to require a ton of trenching. So it would have been prohibitively expensive for the customer. So, disappointing for the customer. They couldn't use this opportunity to upgrade their service. Good for us, because upgrading their service would have delayed this project by quite a lot. The other side of it is they still needed to upgrade their electric panel because it was this old Zinsco panel, which if anybody's familiar with those, are just generally prone to catching on fire. So none of the electricians we were working with were willing to even touch it. So we did work with the customer and worked with Coil to do a panel replacement alongside this hardware install. So that added some additional costs to the customer and additional complexity with coordination and timelines. Ultimately, it went very well. Coil helped support that and did it very cost effectively and successfully. So that was good. Next bullet, as we're talking about that permit classification gap, this is, both for SDG&E interconnection processes, they're not updated specifically for bidirectional chargers. Municipal permits are likely the same. Variable cost by sites, this is kind of like doubling down on the panel upgrade or panel replacement, is like trying to have, I'm recommending to everybody listening, just having kind of a, almost like tiered customer application review process that looks at some of these higher priority or higher need site conditions like panel replacement, service upgrades, solar. All of these will add additional considerations, impacts of timelines and costs. So having a way of kind of triaging and informing customers that this will or will not work or within their expectations is important. And then last one, of course, is Coil did a great job. They have experience, but this is new to a lot of the contractor industry. So being very cautious of customer time and wallets by making sure we're doing vetting of who's quoting and contracting the bidirectional charging hardware. I think that's the end of my slides, but I'll hand it to Nick for the next couple.
Yeah. So just kind of summarizing again and kind of high level, right? So these are, lest we forget, early stage technologies. So, when we look at, again, scaling and everything else from both a industry perspective and utility perspective, just kind of remember that prior processes, at least on the utility side, from an interconnection standpoint, processing these applications, they have really they've been, there may be adaptations or kind of legacy systems that were previously designed for more mature DER. So solar, for example, right? And so the teams internally even maybe historically kind of trained around solar interconnections, and so there may be some cross training that needs to happen as well. In addition to some of the what I alluded to earlier, that the customer portals, the drop down menus, all of those pieces. Whether it's Rule 21 in California or whatever it is in the states that you operate, right? Those are going to look a little bit different, but they may be adaptations or plays on some existing technologies, right? So I think engaging with those teams, early and often. It's the customer generation team here at SDG&E. So those are the folks that process those interconnection applications. That was really critical here. And thankfully, we have some prior work experience with those folks from some of the other V2G pilots and demos that we've done. And so that helped, kind of speed that along. The other piece is, upfront expectations and scalability path for customers and installers. So this has led us, as a follow-up and direct impact of this demonstration, to build out some, pretty robust educational materials that we're hoping to launch soon for customers. Some, 2-3 page kind of PDFs of, what is the value proposition for V2G? Is it a good fit for you? What's your site look like? Do you have solar? Do you have other, assets on your property? What's your panel size, right? To Matthew's point, sort of the checklist in a way. And there are some utilities around the country that have gotten a head start on this that are good examples that we can kind of collectively draw on. PG&E's done some of this work. Our sister IOU up north in the Bay Area, but I would really recommend that other utility colleagues that might be listening, or folks that work with other utilities, really suggest that kind of utility peers think early and often about the educational material that they're putting out, because that can front run a lot of those questions that you might get from customers, that ultimately the utility is going to be the one that kind of has the final say there. So from Mobility's House perspective, right, hardware was installed, working on additional ongoing testing on that site, and successfully conducted an energy discharge event pretty recently. And so from our perspective, like I mentioned, this crawl, walk, run approach, but really leaning into the education piece and making sure we can support scale as well. The other piece I would add is for utilities that have existing programs, whether it's a EVSE hardware rebate, for example, or other incentives or rebates that either with current or future programs could stack on top of some of this work, right? We're just talking about not the economics here, not the program side here. It's just the pure kind of interconnection process. That think about, as you build those materials, at least maybe having space and adding some links in there for customers to find out more about some of those programs that may be the sort of critical piece where this pencils out, at least in these early adopter stages of these technologies. While they're the chargers are still relatively expensive, relative to a non-bidirectional charger, it may pencil out for them if they get involved in in California, an Energy Commission grant opportunity that's out there, right, to subsidize some of that cost, or another utility program that might cover some of the cost of either, avoiding a panel upgrade or going through a panel upgrade, or the hardware itself, et cetera. So just some food for thought there. Those are things that, we've been thinking about as we build out those materials as well. So next slide. And this is just kind of an example of some of those materials. And the page came out a little blurry here, but we've got sort of a short, YouTube video now on our webpage. It's sort of an animated video of high level what is VGI, having sort of a hub for pilot opportunities that's customer facing. And as I mentioned, some of those guides and checklists, not only for the customer, but for the installer as well, so that, it's clear, who are all the stakeholders, what are the next steps. And I think the last thing to mention there is from an installer or contractor perspective, really helpful, right, to translate some of the pieces that might be just givens for us in the utility space around service standards, which are often, right, these 300-page behemoth documents that have all these requirements on placarding and panels and just these sort of nuanced rules. For us, that might seem, like very layman's stuff, but it's not for a customer, certainly not even for most installers too, that are sort of just getting into this side of the business. And so that was a critical piece as well, is how do we translate some of those pieces, or even just cut them out of the relevant sections of our service standards, and then put them into an installer contractor guide, which we're working on concurrently as well. So that's just another consideration, to not require a contractor or installer to have to go through a litany of documents. It's very helpful, right? And again, reducing friction in this space. And I think we're in a good position to do that, right? Because we're the ones that kind of hold the key on those standards. So next slide. And I think Alex is going to wrap us up.
Yeah, awesome work there, Nick and Matt. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the thing that we like to think about is for Kia, like, we really kind of think of this is the Gen 1 era of Resi V2X. So as much as we really love about what we have coming on the horizon, there's a lot of like important things that we're still going through the process of that has been like super helpful to have these guides, because, as you guys mentioned, like, really want this to scale. Like, that's something that Kia is really interested in. We've released some information this past couple of days of kind of where the Hyundai Motor Group plans to go in the next 18 months, and it's really a overall ecosystem that customers can feel like really great about getting into this space. But as you can see, this isn't just a buying a refrigerator plug and play. There's a little bit more going on, and truthfully, as these guys have mentioned, there are still some process improvement that we can do in our learning. And so right now, that's why these pilot stage and kind of like maybe 1-2s kind of self-funded demos are like really important to helping us prove it out. Because the great thing is that a lot of other utilities are watching this, and the things that we're learning are quickly being transported over, that are really helping understand everything. So with that, I'll leave it back.
Thanks, Alex. An excellent way to wrap things up, and just highlighting the value of having all of you and other stakeholders working together. I know we're coming right up on time for our webinar, but Nick, Matthew, and Alex have offered up their email addresses. If you have questions that we can't answer today, take a screenshot. The slides will be available later as well. And I know they're all willing to get into the nitty gritty if needed. I guess just real quick, the only maybe question I'll tee up, and we might not be able to dig in, is, we have V2G in the heading and the title of this. We talked really more about, vehicle to home. And Nick, you had kind of mentioned like there's a potential for this setup to be exporting to the grid. How far are we from that being possible, at least from your perspective for SDG&E?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it, definitely. We have a couple different pathways, right? For commercial customers, we do have an dynamic export compensation rate. It's a very early stage, very pilot rate that we haven't seen real adoption with, but I think that's something that we can iterate on in the future. It's something that I think I saw Max from Toyota on the call. We've done some economic analysis on our campus with Toyota and Fermata Energy around some of that work. So this pilot, at least thus far, we haven't had a chance to do some of the economic analysis because, of course, it was just just energized and installed. But Matt, you can probably speak to some of the plans around that from a testing perspective. But on the residential side, like I mentioned, the ELRP demand response pathway is one option from a customer perspective. And so that's $2 a kilowatt hour. And during a set windows, right, and typically high heat events during the DR season. And so I think that's an opportunity on the residential side as this scales. So it's really through the DR pathway at the moment. In the future, perhaps there will be kind of rates on the residential side, but as of yet, not in our service territory for residential customers.
Great, thank you. And we'll leave everyone in suspense on what Matthew has to say. You can reach out directly because we are over time. We'll invite Judy back we'll invite Judy back to close us out. Again, appreciate you all joining for a great topic.
Thank you again, Stacy, and thank you to all of our speakers today. Great job, great topic. And to everyone in the audience, please consider joining us at the upcoming Summer Symposium, where we'll be talking about a whole range of very interesting EV grid opportunities and EV opportunities in general. So you can find more on the PLMA website. And let me just say thank you for joining us for today's Load Management Dialogue. We'll look forward to seeing you at a later edition. And that concludes today's program. We'll talk soon. Bye for now, everybody.